Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm actually really excited to do this webinar with HD Moore. He's a security researcher, open source programmer, hacker. HD is best known for creating the Metasploit project and being a lead developer of a Metasploit framework, the world's most popular open source penetration testing software. HD is a founder and CEO of Run Zero, a leading provider of exposure management and attack surface management software. Run Zero uses cutting edge research to comprehensively identify assets, services, and exposures at scale through a mix of unauthenticated scanning, passive discovery, and integrations. And prior to starting Run Zero, HD served in various leadership roles at Atreides Partners, Rapid7, Breaking Point Systems, Digital Defense. HD, it's awesome to spend time together. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Oh, thanks, Alex. Yeah, it's been a bit. Good to catch up.
So let's talk about your evolution from offensive security to Run Zero. You have a fairly well known history as a computer security researcher, white hat hacker. What is a hacker mentality? What's your perspective just in general on hacking and within cybersecurity industry?
I mean, in general, it's the idea that you want to accomplish some kind of goal or you want to get access to something or create something, but you don't really have the normal tool set for it. So a little bit of MacGyvering on the technical side. Like you say, great, I want to be able to break into this bank account, but the only thing I have in front of me is a login prompt. How do I go from a login prompt to someone else's account? And trying to find all the different ways that software can fail and different domino configurations to get you to that spot. So it's a lot of understanding whatever you're trying to, attack, target, break, figuring out the things that maybe other folks may have overlooked, and then abusing a ton of really small information leaks and other logic flaws to eventually get to where you want to get to. And that's kind of what I love doing at work too. Is how do you put together all these different clues about something to discover that, oh, this thing is vulnerable, oh, this thing is exposed to the internet in a strange way.
And I think a lot of the time people confuse the word hacker with a negative connotation. Actually, a hacker, like a hacker mindset, means you have curiosity. You're trying to figure out how do things work instead of necessarily the negative connotation where you break into stuff. So if you look at cybersecurity and also hacking, how do you feel it evolved since the early 2000s? Like, what do you think has been the evolution in the past 25 years?
In the early days, I mean, the biggest barrier for learning about computers and learning about different types of systems was financial. If you didn't have a lot of money, if you didn't have, rich parents, you didn't work at a university that had a really fast computer, you had no way to learn about operating systems like Solaris or AIX, things like that. Your only choice really was to go out there and figure out what's on the internet and explore or find ways to set up stuff in your lab. Otherwise, do the research on yourself. So when you look at most hacking approaches, whether it's creativity, whether it's building, breaking, it's very much about how do you get to the same output as, somebody else doing the same work, but without using any of the same tools or resources. What is the fastest, most clever, most interesting way to get to the same output?
So let's talk a little bit about Metasploit. So I've used Metasploit. It's now bundled as part of Kali Linux. You created it back in 2003. But first of all, what is Metasploit? Like, for people who don't know, like, what was your actually genesis and inspiration for building Metasploit?
Sure. Yeah, 2003 was a fun time. The old guard of kind of hackers who would just release their exploit tools for everybody else had stopped doing so. Effectively, like it became uncool for the cool kids to share their exploits. And so what happened is that if you were doing security work, you're being hired to pen test a bank or break into something legally, you didn't really have those tools anymore. You had to build your own. You had to possibly go buy them from vendors that had just started, like Core Security or Community Canvas. And so our approach was like, well, no one's really doing this well. I can't afford the commercial tools. I can't afford 50 grand a seat at whatever it was at the time for the competitor. So we started building our own. And that was very much learn how to write exploits, figure out how they work, figure out how to do shellcode, and just slowly build up something that went from being so much of a laughing stock early on of like, what is this weird script kiddie tool to now just something everyone else depends on for getting their job done.
Let's talk about how you went from doing offensive stuff, building Metasploit. Then it got acquired by Rapid7. What was it like? And now to building Run Zero. Just how would you characterize your career of going from offensive to defensive security?
I think in a lot of ways, it's always been the same thing. It's the same types of tools, same type of work, same type of research, just kind of using it slightly differently. So we joke that like run zero is you put 1,000 pen test tricks in a trench coat and you call it an asset inventory because the way that we're identifying stuff, we try to do it the hardest way possible. So just like in Metasploit, where it's a tool designed to break into things you're not supposed to have access to, it uses lots of little information leaks, like okay, what version of Windows is it? What service pack? What language pack? Things like that to slowly put together enough clues that when you trigger the exploit, you succeed. And doing asset inventory, doing asset discovery, source fingerprinting, topology enumeration, it's the same thing. Like you might get data from other places that you're allowed to get it from, like S&P from like a switch, for example. But most of the time, you're just trying to figure it out any way you can. And if you just depend on the rest of the network to play along with you, you're going to miss a lot of stuff. So the take is, if you really want to find everything in your environment, you really want to be able to defend against all the attacks, you have to go find everything, including the things your tools don't know about. And that's where a Metasploit background comes into play.
Let's talk about entrepreneurship and building Run Zero. So we're both technical founders. Being a technical founder and writing code is very different from running a company, trying to close customers. So, what are some of the lessons that you learned that you wish you knew 10 years ago?
It's fair. I got a little bit of experience after the Rap7 acquisition of Metasploit. They brought me in as a leadership there to help build out the department. I opened a couple offices here in Austin, hired the teams, built the product, all that fun stuff. So that was kind of my first taste of being able to go run the entire product side, top to bottom, and get a product out the door and then go sell that product. So that was a lot of fun. But when I started Run Zero, I felt like I hadn't done, the other half, hadn't done the sales side, hadn't done the marketing side. And I felt like I really wanted to understand those roles really well before I hired a single person. So the first 2.5 years, it was just me, like writing all the code, building the SaaS, doing the marketing, doing the calls, doing it contracts, figuring out unemployment insurance for hiring, all that kind of fun stuff. And I felt like by the time I got to the end of that, we had about 1 million of ARR. We had about 112 customers, and I was able to then go confidently hire people to do more of that work because I'd actually done enough of my own experience there to do it. Because the hardest part is like, especially a CEO, is are the people that are working for you doing a good job? Because these are all professional bullshitters. If you hire someone who's like a very experienced leader in sales, like they've had to be selling up all their life, right, to the board, to the CEO, to everybody else. And so you need to be able to figure out like who actually knows what they're doing, who's just really good at blowing smoke. And for me, the way to understand that was to go do the work myself for a while first.
How do you maintain that higher end bar? Because initially, when you start, okay, you hire like 5 ninjas, 10 ninjas. Then, as you go from 10 to 20 people, the bar could get lower, like it's impossible. Then, as you get even bigger, you no longer might have a control and oversight over every single hire that gets made. So, how do you, like, what are the principles that you're using as you're building Run Zero?
I mean, good leaders is great. You hire somebody who has a high bar themselves. There's the old adage about, A's hire A's, B's hire B's, and C's hire everybody else. Like you kind of need to be people who are at least a B at every layer of your management chain. And you need to keep in touch with your people. Like you can't just kind of expect a department to go wander off and do the right thing if you're not keeping track of it. And folks don't mind if the CEO jumps into something that is normally not the CEO's job. They like the help. They like the exposure. They want to talk about the jobs. They want to describe kind of what challenges they have. So for me, it's just being able to drop in and go hands on anywhere in the team and say, what do you need help with? What are you struggling with? How can I help you get there? And that also helps you understand like what is the management of this team like? How are they being supported? Do they have the resources they need for it? So I think hiring is the first challenge, but then it's keep that team sharp and having that sense of urgency to fix what we need to fix in a startup mode is really the hard part. It's not like a large corporate job where some things can take a quarter or 2 quarters to finish. Typically, in a startup, if it comes to your attention as a CEO, it needs to be fixed like that day. You need to have it off your plate pretty quick. You need to figure out what the solution is very fast. And so it's not something where you can just kind of expect team to go figure it out for a month or two and come back to you. You really do need to trust the team to, one, realize that it's an urgent problem they've got to solve, and two, realize that they can lean on you and everybody else to help get there.
So, you've been a CEO, then you've been a CTO, now you're the CEO again. How has that shift in scope changed the way that you approach leadership within the organization?
Oh, definitely. So early on, technical CEO, building everything front to back, that was great. I enjoyed it. I brought in a friend of mine as a co-founder and say, you know what, I want you to go lead sales, product marketing, all that fun stuff. Go forth and do. He did a great job. It gets from about 1 million to 10 million. And then we hit kind of some rocky patch with economics and whatnot. And he's a exceptionally nice person. He's probably the nicest person I know my whole life, like a great friend of mine still. And we were moving into a market where it's gotten a lot less nice, where competitors are doing shady things. We're dealing with kind of all kinds of horrific messaging and things like that. And you kind of need like a wartime CEO versus peacetime. And that's where I had to come back in. And it's just, you need somebody who's going to be a little bit less nice and a little more straightforward and not necessarily spend as much time on people's feelings as you need sometimes to get things out the door, which it doesn't mean you're rude. It just means you have to be efficient.
On a lighter note, what drove the name change from Rumble to Run Zero?
We'd love to say that we think the name is better, but I love Rumble. I thought it was great. The problem is
I
that
liked
somebody else
I
did
liked
too.
Rumble when you started it.
Yeah, it was a great name. The problem is we had Rumble Inc. in the US. We own all the trademarks to it. We were doing licensing to Rumble Boxing. So Rumble Boxing in New York got the trademark license for us to use it. And we're like, that's great. And then there's this tiny little company in Canada that got reverse acquired through a SPAC by Digital World Media and effectively became the conservative party's media arm, and Rumble Network Video became everything. So after January 6th, we saw something like 2,500 signups the day after, all by people who definitely didn't know they're downloading an asset inventory tool slash vulnerability scanner. And so we had all these folks signing up for it, like, hey, how do I upload my videos? We're like, what are you talking about? And it was finally, it got to the point that confusion was so high that we had to give up, change our name. And of course, they had the Rumble stock ticker at that point because of the reverse for the SPAC. It was just tough.
So when I started the company, I like puzzles, I like chess, as you can see behind me. So I looked at Jigsaw. The domain was registered, so I just changed the letter and registered Jigsaw with an R. Then I realized it's too rough. So I thought, okay, like let's talk about security, let's talk about scores. So I registered the domain called SecScore. But then when you look for SecScore, other type of adult material would pop up.
I bet.
Which is why I'm not qualified to do marketing. So then finally we registered SecurityScorecard, and the .com domain was owned by somebody else who I had to meet the guy for dinner, who is hoarding tens of thousands of these domains, and listen to his divorce story and convince him to sell the domain to us for $5,000. The struggles around naming and domains also have been experienced here.
It is tough, especially the .coms these days. Like we had the same thing. We didn't own the .com when we bought the domain. What we found was every time we looked for a name, the price would go up because people who were watching the DNS logs would jack the price up of the landing pages of the domains we're interested in. So we had to give up. We had to go download the entire .com database from ICANN instead, and we ended up brute forcing our way through the entire .com zone file, trying to find every combination of letters and words that could possibly be a good name, and then work backwards to find all the domains that we wanted around it. And so we ended up with like Run Zero, even though it's a nice name now. Like it was really just the result of brute forcing every possible combination that was not taken.
Well, let's talk about cybersecurity. Let's talk about enterprise risk and having visibility into your environment as a CISO as a next competitive advantage. So, a lot of vulnerability scanners don't really work effectively for the networks. So, why is that? Can you talk a little bit about the vulnerability scanning? Then you have some companies who are trying to help you prioritize what vulnerabilities to focus on, but it never really like works the way that you expect it to. So what's going on with this whole vulnerability management world?
Yeah, go all the way back to the beginning, right? And we had two types of products in security. You had things that detect and block attacks, and you had things that found the vulnerabilities and told you what to fix before the attackers found them. And we still just have those two categories of products in a lot of ways. You have things that are proactive that tell you what to go fix. And you have things that something's already happened, you got to go figure out what happened and respond to it. So on the preventative side, hackers drove it all. Every single exploit that was in the wild, people were using, that's what drove people to write a vulnerability check for it. That eventually got bigger and bigger. It became more of a compliance thing. We started seeing folks doing PCI compliance or 853 or whatever the regime the company had to stick to was. And so these scanning tools got more and more complicated. They started going from tell you about vulnerabilities that attackers are exploiting most to tell me about every vulnerability, tell me about every possible missing patch, every missing update. So the folks who are using these tools started getting buried in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities, saying, I don't know which one of these things to go fix. And my point is like probably none of those. Probably none of those are correct at all. Because on one hand, the vulnerability scanning industry, which is now down to effectively three big players, the majority of their checks, something like 95 all the way down to about 80% of checks, depending on the company, require authentication or an agent to tell you if they work or not. And so if you look at what in your environment you can actually authenticate to because of firewall rules, because of authentication domains, because of just where it lives in the network, it's a pretty small percentage. You look at maybe half of your environment you can actually authenticate to. So you've got tools where 90% of all the checks in these tools do not work for half of your equipment. And yet the IT team is still struggling to figure out which of these things to go fix because they're getting this giant pile of vulnerabilities about half of the assets. So at the end of the day, we're doing all this work, we're trying to prioritize it, and then the end result is we're still not even fixing the most urgent vulnerabilities at all. So, cover our take is like throw all that away, start from top, and build a scanner that tells you what you need to action first. And then compliance is much more a very low secondary use case. Like our goal number one is to tell you what is an attacker going to exploit in your network right now and go fix that, as opposed to burying somebody in 1,000 Microsoft patch updates.
So how do you figure out what an attacker is going to exploit on the network? Are you trying to get the hacker chair and figure out what type of CVs are being exploited and then marrying it to the network? Like how do you really figure out that intent of how somebody is going to try to break into the network?
Yeah, I mean, the easy way is to wait for it to happen and then talk about it, right? That's what CISA-CAV is. CISA-CAV is waiting for somebody to be breached, and it becomes such a bad incident they report to the government, and the government investigates it, and then weeks later the government will say, "Hey, this vulnerability is so bad, it's now on our known exploited vulnerabilities list." But the problem is if you start from that list as your way to respond, you're already a month and a half behind. You basically are the kev data if you wait for the kev data to make a decision about the vulnerability. And that's not great. So instead, kind of like you said, you have to go look at hacker chatter, you have to go figure out what things are being exploited in the wild. We run a big honey net here for fun. It's like a /20 that pulls in all kinds of fun things. We talk with other security firms that are doing research into kind of emerging threats. We license some data in a couple places. We look at internet scan wide data in other spots. It's kind of a little bit of everything. You need to say because the attackers are not going to go after every vulnerability. They're going to go after which ones that are least protected, that are least visibility, that are the most effective. And that's when you see so many exploits against these like edge facing network firewalls and security products.
So not all vulnerabilities have CVEs, and not all of them actually get exploited. So besides obviously trying and getting technology like Run Zero, what are some other best practices that you would recommend for CISOs who are trying to get a hold of the whole vulnerability management?
Yeah, the way I like to look at the world is if the device is managed, if I've got an agent on it, if I've got something else to control, assume patches are going to install. If your auto patching doesn't work, you got a bigger problem. So number one is make sure your auto updates apply correctly across everything. That takes out 90% of all the noise. And then two is okay, what's actually exposed to the networks that you can't trust? What's exposed to the internet? What has direct access to a more sensitive system? We've seen segmentation become the number one tool that folks use to kind of isolate risk within the environment. Like put all of your dodgy devices by one vendor over here. The challenge, though, is segmentation is often super broken. It's really common to find a device that has more than one IP address in multiple networks. Probably the most underrated risk for a lot of companies is their layer two infrastructure. Like you talk about a company isolating all their segments, but then they leave the management port of their segmentation tool open to the network that's being protected. Like if you can get on someone's guest Wi-Fi and then talk to their Cisco router management port, you've got a bigger problem. The attacker in the guest network can now reconfigure segmentation and get access to wherever they want. So there's these kind of like privilege escalations and movement capabilities across the network, both at the layer two level as well as authentication level. And tools like Bloodhound are really good at helping you with the authentication side. And there are some tools that are decent at like the network topology side, but they're pretty rare and far between.
What do you feel AI and automation could do to help with this? For example, you could envision hypothetically in a future where you train LLM on a lot of a hacker chatter, and then you somehow normalize representation of different devices in your network, and then that's also used to help you prioritize what to actually focus on and to patch, and hopefully all of it happens actually through agents, so you don't even have humans trying to get involved in any of it. Like, where do you feel like the whole LLM AI automation could play a role in this?
I mean, there's lots of things that these glorified spell checkers can do for us, but I'm not sure they're going to solve the world that way. At the end of the day, we're trying to defend against attacker behavior, and you can't predict that perfectly because you don't control it. Like when you look at the risk equation, it's impact by likelihood. You do not control likelihood. The attackers do. They decide that that day they want to wake up and break into your web server, and they're always going to find the most, easiest path in, the thing that takes them the least amount of effort, or at least is the one that you're least likely to detect. And so you by training data on existing behavior, you're almost guaranteeing you're not going to see the next behavior. We've seen the most common initial access vectors continue to change over the years. For a long time, it was phishing. More recently, it's turned back into edge-facing hardware and virtual appliances, often by security vendors because they've now become the weakest link. So it's tough. Like any given 6 month, 1 year period, you can probably train something pretty well to keep up with like what are the current trends. The problem is it's changing so fast that if you build it for one thing, it won't be the right tool next year.
Are there any other blind spots that CISOs and cybersecurity leaders overlook today? What risks do you see that enterprises might not be preparing for? For example, we do talk a lot about the usage of deepfakes, and phishing has always been a topic for as long as you remember. We talked about 0 days, we talked about 500 different things, but what are people not thinking of that they should be thinking of?
As a CEO, one of the ones that's surprising to me was some of the business email compromise stuff where it doesn't directly affect us, but we're a party to a larger scam. So we had a case where, this is a very common technique now, but it wasn't at the time. A scammer will impersonate one of your resellers, your partners, a vendor you work with, and say, please send us your aging report. Like tell us how much money we owe you and do. And if your accounting folks aren't sharp, they would say, this seems like a low risk thing to share. I'll go ahead and reply back to you and share it. But in reality, that's the attacker. And what they're doing is they're getting lists of all the people who owe you money. And then they're going to impersonate you and ask all those people to wire them the money. And they've got the exact numbers from your invoice, your PO numbers, et cetera. And they start stealing money from all the people that owe you the money. So they didn't steal from you directly, but now your partners are much less likely to pay for it twice, right? We've had a customer who was just straight out like they paid the wrong vendor and we had nothing to do with it. It was their email being compromised, not ours. We didn't offer data as part of an aging report. So we had no real culpability in it. It's just at the end of the day, the customer ended up having to pay the invoice twice. and that's not much fun for anybody. So that was a surprising vector that's not really high tech. It's just one where when you're going after security vendors, you have to be a little more creative in terms of how you trick them. In our case, they tried to trick us into giving us our aging report, not actually having us wire the money. They're using us as like a component in these larger scams, and so we catch a lot of those. But folks are definitely getting really creative on the business email compromise side.
Well, you did mention one word about the vendors. So let's maybe shift into the supply chain ecosystem risk. So we collaborated with Verizon and provided the data for the Verizon data breach report, which is terrific. And one statistic in the Verizon data breach report that they published is that the percentage of breaches which involve a third party doubled in just the last year. And in 2024, at least 35.5%, so almost 40% of the data breaches originated from a third party compromise. And we increasingly seeing people break into a software vendor and then they use it as a jumping pad to get into a lot of the organizations. So it's no longer how secure your organization is, but now it's a security of your extended ecosystem. Yourself, your suppliers, your vendors, other companies who might have access to your data. So let's talk about this expansion of the attack surface. What do you think organizations should be doing to mitigate this risk?
It is tough. I mean, there's a reason why companies out there like ChainGuard and Socket are doing so well right now. ChainGuard provides like pre-authorized or pre-reviewed, pre-secured container images, right? Socket Dev will give you the same thing for your like your npm repository. The problem with these supply chain attacks is you could trust every person that you can think of in that chain, and they could all do things perfectly right, and you can still get breached. And that's because there's so many other intermediary services. You've got these artifact repositories. You've got companies like GitHub that operate the registry itself. You've got these binary caching layers between you and the customer. Some of the more tricky ones that we've seen are people who do what do you call it? They impersonate the name of an internal package on a public repo. So they find out that one of your websites uses, an internal name. Let's call it, run zero dash web theme or something like that. And if that package name is not available publicly, they can effectively register that name ahead of time. The next time your internal systems do a build, they grab it from the public repo, not a private repo. So that's a really good example of like a really creative attack where there's really anything that the vendor did wrong. They just didn't realize that the public repo would have taken precedence when it's resolving a package for a build.
What do you think if we think about unmanaged and unknown assets within the third parties? How do they elevate risk across the supply chain vendor ecosystem?
I mean, the short version is it's infinite, right? If you don't know about it, you don't know what portion of the risk it's going to be. You don't know how risky it is at all. And so it's the same problem with like assets in the network, even with supply chain. A lot of our customers, before they start using our product, they're missing at least a quarter to half their assets. And they think they know about them. They come in and they try our product and say, holy cow, what is all this other stuff? And we're like, well, there was no tool you had already that would have found it. You have to actively go crawl the networks and find this stuff. We worked with a large city zoo and they accidentally found their ISP network wired into their own behind the firewall, where they had access to all of the ISPs VMware ESXi machines directly through the internal network. So they were confused why we reported that they had 10,000 ESXi servers when they are basically a zoo. But it was because of these misconfigured networks everywhere. So it's really common to find these like entire nasty misconnected networks behind the firewall. Or when I was working in Boston for a bit, one of the banks was located inside of a bigger bank and located inside of a bigger building. But from any one of those networks, you can get access to another one. From one bank, you can get to the investment bank. From the bank itself, you can get to the access control system for the door. So I was doing the outbrief there, and I literally walked up and opened the door with my phone to get into the building. They're like, "How'd you do that?" I'm like, "Well, it's on your network. Where do you pop this machine?" And it's nothing's filtered.
So, do you feel like there are any systems or technologies that are missing to help mitigate the third party risk and the whole supply chain ecosystem? We obviously had a whole evolution. Before, people just sent questionnaires, then you had companies like SecurityScorecard pioneer the concept of trying to measure cybersecurity from outside and give security KPIs. Now you have some people who came up with a concept of trust centers, which is kind of interesting. Effectively, it's just a glorified Wikipedia page where you can publish your documents. Like, what do you feel like is missing in the whole supply chain ecosystem innovation?
I mean, the big one, and a friend of mine, Wendy Nather, likes to say that there's a thing called the security poverty line. If you don't make this much money, you can't afford good security tools. And that applies across the board. So what's really important as a security vendor, both for Security Scorecard, for us as Run Zero, is you have to help out everybody else too. You can't just provide tools to people who can afford them. You have to provide something else for everybody else to participate in the ecosystem to secure their stuff. So when you're using GitHub, for example, as the repository archive, they do a lot of stuff for free, even for their low paid professional accounts, things like that. You don't give GitHub a ton of money, they still do all this work for you. And that's really important because if you don't secure the entire ecosystem, it doesn't matter how well your well to do companies are. It matters how well everybody else is and being able to detect those attacks at scale. So, like Security Scorecard, having a product that has a free tier is amazing. Like you can get a good idea of your third-party vendor risk very quickly. With Run Zero, we offer a community edition for free for home users and small businesses. It's the same idea. You really want to help bring the overall security level up across the board, not just people who can afford to pay you.
And I love that expression of security poverty line. That's a really great expression. Actually, I remember a couple of years ago, we've done research together with the World Economic Forum, which we published in Davos, where it turns out that actually GDP, gross domestic product of a country, also correlates to security level of a country. Like literally, if you just scan the entire attack surface limited by geographic location of IP addresses, and you just look how many CVs are open versus, and you correlate it to GDP, how much money the company makes, you have a very clear statistical correlation, which kind of makes sense because if you have more money, you can afford more technology. But it applies not just to companies, it applies even to countries. Today, we're all interconnected effectively to each other. And so I love, for example, the fact that also Run Zero, you also offer a free community edition that's popular for home labs, small businesses. So it's not just a commercial tool, but also for somebody who might not be able to afford it and is just running a small university lab, they have access to it as well.
Yep, and that's the goal. I mean, the things that we see in the small networks also help us do better services for our paying customers. We identified at devices like every time holidays roll around, people buy all their new internet connected toys. We saw that all of that pop up in our home users networks first. We were able to basically write rules against it, figure out how to detect them, and then much later, let's say we are working with a large bank and they find a PlayStation console in their network, we can tell them exactly what it is because we've already seen it someplace else. So there's definitely benefits both ways, and the idea is like if you don't at least help everybody else bring their security up, it doesn't matter how well of a job you do with just the well-to-do customers.
So RSA is in a rearview mirror. Black Hat is incoming. Uh, AI is the big topic. You walk in a conference, everybody does AI. It doesn't matter what you do. So the thousands of vendors in cybersecurity landscape today, just way, way more than even existed 10 years ago, which makes the selection and choice so much harder for CISOs who are inundated. So let's prognosticate and talk about innovation and the future of cybersecurity. Do you feel like there's specific cybersecurity solutions that look promising? Like, what do you feel like are some areas of research in cybersecurity where you feel bullish about what people are trying to do?
We're in a somewhat ugly consolidation stage right now for a lot of the CTEM framework stuff, the vuln assessment, vuln management, exposure management stuff. And it's bad in a lot of ways. It's bad in that, the best point solution companies really have to struggle to maintain their business because they're now being kind of crushed by Microsoft, CrowdStrike, Tenable, Qualys, et cetera, all providing tons and tons of extra functionality, often at low cost, to keep the business they have. One of the things I enjoy the least in security is having to compete with an antivirus vendor for my customer's dollar because they're trying to give away something that we do and they just don't do it very well. That happened at McAfee with Foundstone when we competed with them at Rapid7. It's happening these days with CrowdStrike where they're delivering new features that are very low cost or discounted heavily up front just to crush all the point solutions out there. And Microsoft doing the same thing with their Defender for Everything model. So, I mean, the upside of that is now customers are getting these functionalities, these bits of these features that they didn't have before. So the good news is everyone is now expecting to have some sort of attack surface management. Everyone has to know some sort of external attack surface management. They have to know some kind of exposure level. You're starting to get vulnerability management and security testing happening in places that just never did it before. The downside, of course, is that vendors who spend a lot of time trying to do that really well are being discounted as a result. Like they have to fight harder to get the customers because they're fighting against free but not great product quality in a lot of cases.
So, do you feel like there are certain areas or buckets which are going to fizzle out sooner rather than later? Do you feel like there are any categories that are overhyped?
I mean, I think any new category is overhyped. We haven't been doing anything different for 20 years. It shouldn't need to do a new name, right? I mean, look at all the AI stuff. Everyone's like, now we're going to do LLM security. I'm like, okay, but isn't that just security? Isn't just web apps? Like, end of the day, it's all the same stuff. And I think AI in particular has been the worst for me to come to terms with that people are, especially the security aspect of LLMs. The entire point of like security run on LLM is to prevent the customer from getting an output you don't want to give them. But it's effectively cross-site scripting as a service. You're giving them the same language that you're using to program that model and expecting those things not to get interconnected. And we see that fail continuously. So I kind of think it's a lost cause to be able to really have a secure model outside of a Facebook moderation type approach where you just know bad stuff is happening and keep chipping away at it. I don't think we're going to get to a spot where you can ever trust an LLM as being safe and not be able to manipulate it by a third party, because the entire point of an LLM is manipulated by a third party. So that's a challenge. I mean, so there's a lot of hype around LLM security and LLM driven security these days, but at the end of the day, they're not really doing anything new yet. They're often just automate some of the low hanging fruit.
So where do you think security industry is going? I know you mentioned we're in this consolidation space where a lot of the solutions are being bundled. People talk about platformization as the buzzword, where a lot of solutions are offered through a single vendor. And CISOs now not don't always care about quality. They don't care about the best of breed solution. They care about a best bundle solution where, like you said, a lot of the time you just get it for free. It might not be the best attack surface management tool, but you know what? You get a just an okay tool from a big vendor, and that might be okay to check the box. So where do you feel security industry overall is going to go in the next couple of years? Is it going to get better or worse? What's your prognosis?
Well, it's gonna get worse, right? I mean, upside to things getting bundled is customers use more products, they get more feedback, they get everything kind of in one spot. Hopefully, they get a better security outcome. The flip side, though, is that because those products aren't particularly deep in different areas, they're not usually the best way to do it. And so, as soon as you have a company that has been paying, their antivirus vendor a lot of money to also doing vulnerability management, and they get breached because of vulnerability that they weren't told about, they're gonna be like, "What the hell? Like, why didn't you tell me about this?" So and so. Then they're gonna have to go back and look at the toolkit and say, "Wow, we actually need to spend money on a tool that does this better." So you kind of have to wait for the other shoe to drop. You have to wait for these tools to become adopted and for them not to work out and for customers to get mad about it and then to go find something better. And that's the whole cycle repeats again. And we've seen about 3 or 4 consolidation phases just full management over the years. And we're definitely gonna have another one. My guess is in a year and a half, 2 years, we're gonna be back to buying dedicated DAS scanners, dedicated vulnerability management solutions outside of the platform, like because the tools that we have are just not gonna be keeping up with current threats.
So let's talk about the trends that are going to influence what we do in the next few years. So we see supply chain attacks becoming much more popular because we're all interconnected. We see business email compromise that you mentioned as being a big use factor. What else do you think are going to be some of the trends that are going to influence kind of the positives or the negatives of cybersecurity?
Kind of on a international level, I think we're going to see more of kind of the China firewall approach, where companies just flat out say, you know, what, we're going to start putting some filtering in at our gateways and not really treat the internet as a big open sponge anymore. We're going to actually have like the national firewall of various forums, and you're going to see networks split up into kind of different kind of sub networks of the internet that can't talk to each other anymore. We're already kind of seeing that the rollout of ZTNA, the zero trust network access tools, means that you no longer have like a big central pool of resources, and then a lot of folks, connecting to it through VPN. You now have individual point-to-point authentication, individual point-to-point resource allocation. So it's getting a lot more complicated. We're going from having to protect like the hard crunchy shell of your organization and have the GUI center to now where your resources are all over the map across 20 different cloud providers, and maintaining access and security across all those different areas is much harder. So my guess is we'll see more breaches. We're going to see more data loss, more problems. Hopefully, we'll see some improvements across the board. We have seen really big improvements in language safety, at least. So adoption of like memory safe languages has been fantastic for preventing kind of the next wave of buffer overflows, heap corruption, things like that. So that's been positive to see, but we still see just as many logic flaws, SQL injection, otherwise authentication bypass issues. And if you look at what problems continue to repeat, it's often default settings, weak passwords, manufacturer backdoors. This stuff hasn't gone away, and it doesn't really be getting any better.
Well, are you ready to shift into the rapid fire questions?
Shoot, yeah.
What's your favorite book? Could be in any field.
Uh, Probably This Alien Shore. It's a weird sci-fi book that also is very hacker centric.
Who is the leader that you most admire?
There's a lot. I'm trying to pick one offhand. I don't know. I like Obama. I think Obama did a great job of bridging a lot of divides in the U.S. in terms of having people who are super political being able to work with each other.
If you could have a conversation with anyone, dead or alive, over a meal and drinks, who would it be? What would you discuss? And what type of food would you order?
Probably Alan Turing, and I'm assuming it'd be, hopefully not British food. Maybe we can go to a French place instead. But be very much about like, what are your thoughts about computing and self sentience, and chatting about, okay, we're going to call a test after you for the next couple hundred years, and it's going to be about telling if something is a robot or not, things like that, or at least a Turing complete in that sense. So I think it'd be fascinating to talk with Turing about where he thinks the world could go in the future.
So not British food or British food? What would
Oh,
you get?
no offense to the British, but we'd go somewhere to a French restaurant, I think.
So, to continue on that topic, if you could live in any city for a year, except where you live right now, where would we find you?
A bunch. I mean, I grew up near the ocean, so I'd love to go back to a place that has an ocean nearby, whether it's Tokyo or something else. But yeah, New York is fantastic. Tokyo is great. Something like that.
And the final question is, if you could choose a superpower, what would it be and why?
I don't know. I think just out of my own curiosity, I'd love to be able to process RF signals in my head. I think it'd be great just to be able to see the Wi-Fi, read the packets, not need tools to figure out what the frequency of a particular bus is, things like that. But I'm kind of weird in that sense.
So you would have basically a Wireshark in your head, effectively embedded.
Absolutely, and a current meter and all that fun stuff. I think I'd get really fascinated by creating new ways to sense the world, and so I build lots of little fun toys and tools for it.
It's cool. Well, look, thank you so much, HD. This was super fun. I think a lot of super interesting conversation and insights. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This conversation will be available on the Bright Talk channel after we conclude. But HD, thanks for your leadership, innovation, first with Metasploit security in general, and now Run Zero. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, Alex. It's been fun.